Welcome back, y'all, to our final podcast on public opinion and political action. In today's podcast, we will be looking at how Americans participate in politics and understanding public opinion and political action. The learning objectives for this podcast are as follow. 1. Classify forms of political participation into two broad types. And 2. Analyze how public opinion about the scope of government guides political behavior. As you read this material, you should have noticed that the textbook points out that the diversity of the American public and its opinions must be faithfully channeled through the political process in order for the American government to work efficiently and effectively. At the same time, the least informed among the public are also the least likely to participate in the political process. I would like you to evaluate the effect that this inequality of participation has on the democratic process. The authors of the textbook point out that more people today think the government is too big rather than too small. Yet a plurality has consistently called for increased spending on domestic programs. Many political scientists have looked at these contradictory findings and concluded that Americans are ideological conservatives but operational liberals. I would like you to analyze this theory with reference to the public debate over the latest presidential budget proposals. So let's now begin. How Americans participate in politics. Political participation encompasses the many activities used by citizens to influence the selection of political leaders or the policies they pursue. Paradoxically, the United States has a participatory political culture, but only 60% of Americans voted in the 2004 presidential election, and only 40% voted in the 2006 midterm elections. Turnout in local elections is even lower. Political scientists generally distinguish between two broad types of participation: conventional and unconventional. Conventional participation includes many widely accepted modes of influencing government, such as voting, trying to persuade others, ringing doorbells for a petition, and running for office. Although the decline of voter turnout is a development Americans should rightly be concerned about, a broader look at political participation reveals some positive developments for particularly democracy. Unconventional participation includes activities that are often dramatic, such as protesting, civil disobedience, and even violence. Protest is a form of political participation designed to achieve policy change through dramatic and unconventional tactics. And protests today are often orchestrated to provide television cameras with vivid images. Throughout American history, individuals and groups have sometimes used civil disobedience, in which they consciously break laws that they think are unjust. Nonviolent civil disobedience was one of the most effective techniques of the civil rights movement in the South. Although political participation can also be violent, as in some of the Vietnam War protests of the 60s, perhaps the best indicator of how well socialized Americans are to democracy is that protest typically is aimed at getting the attention of government rather than overthrowing it. In the United States, participation is a class-biased activity, with citizens of higher socioeconomic status participating more than others. Minority groups like Hispanics and African Americans are below average in terms of political participation. However, the participation differences between these groups and the national average have been declining. While blacks, Hispanics, and whites of equal incomes and educations are compared, it is the minorities who participate more in politics. Remember, the right of political protest is constitutionally protected as an integral part of freedom of speech in the United States. First Amendment. Understanding public opinion and political action. It is so very essential to analyze how public opinion about the scope of government guides political behavior. Public attitudes towards the scope of government. The question of government power is a complex one, but it is one of the key controversies in American politics today. Public opinion on different aspects of the same issue do not always hold together well. While more people today think the government is too big rather than too small, the plurality has consistently called for spending on programs like education, health care, aid to the big cities, protecting the environment, and fighting crime. Many political scientists have looked at these contradictory findings and concluded that Americans are ideological conservatives, but operational liberals. Democracy, public opinion, and political action. Americans often take for granted the opportunity to replace our leaders at the next election. Perhaps the best indicator of how well socialized Americans are to democracy is that protest typically is aimed at getting the attention of government, not overthrowing it. Even if they are only voting according to the nature of the times, voters are clearly being heard, which holds elected officials accountable for their actions. Now I've got 3 things I need you to do. 1. Classify forms of political participation into 2 broad types. 2. Classify forms of political participation into 2 broad types. 3. Analyze how public opinion about the scope of government guides political behavior. That concludes our podcast for today, in which we focused on how Americans participate in politics and understanding public opinion and political action. The learning objectives were: 1. Classify forms of political participation into 2 broad types. 2. Analyze how public opinion about the scope of government guides political behavior. Tune in again on the same bat time and the same bat channel for the mass media and the political agenda. Thank you. Have a good day.